I think it's safe to say that I'm a fairly big Falcom fan. The Trails series is my favorite series in all of gaming, and while I'm still not caught up with the series yet, I've loved every Ys game that I've played so far. It would not be an exaggeration to say that at this point, Falcom is pretty easily my favorite video game developer. However, despite my love for the games that this company creates, there was one game that seemed to mar Falcom's catalog in my eyes for the longest time. While I wouldn't say that I didn't like the game, it definitely stood out as the only Falcom game that I just did not really resonate with all that much. That game is Tokyo Xanadu. So recently, I decided to revisit Tokyo Xanadu after 8 years to see if my original opinions on the game still held, and I thought that Kyoto Xanadu's release was a good excuse to give this game another shot. I am a man of my word after all. I did not remember much about the game aside from a few plot points, so this playthrough still felt pretty fresh. I also wanted to recreate my original experience as much as possible, so I decided to play through the version of Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus on the PS4, rather than use the newer version with a better script. Was this choice necessary? Probably not, but I'm weird like that. So with this video, I want to talk about my time revisiting this game and seeing which of my opinions have withstood the test of time, and which have now changed after I've had a lot more Falcom games under my belt. With all of that out of the way, no spoilers ahead, and let's get right into it. Before we begin talking about the different aspects of the game, I quickly want to go over my major complaints with Tokyo Xanadu that I developed after my first playthrough. I remember I had 3 main complaints. I thought the characters were a bit bland, especially regarding Ko, and many were a bit too tropey for my liking. I remember I thought that the gameplay was just kinda meh, and I remember my main complaint was that the game went on for a bit too long and that it had too many endings, as it were. Not to put the cart before the horse here, but my views on all of these points are very different after this replay. So let's start with the gameplay. Tokyo Xanadu, what's happening? Oh, my bad. Tokyo Xanadu, EX Plus, is an action RPG that mixes a lot of stuff from both Trails and Ys. The combat is much more like Ys, and I would liken it to the style of Ys 8 and 9. With you having access to a party of 3, each of whom have a different elemental type, and you can swap between them to make battles go a lot faster. I suppose Ys 7 and Memories of Celceta would be better comparison points, as Ys 8 and 9 released after Tokyo Xanadu, but I have yet to play Ys 7 and Celceta. While the combat is much more akin to Ys, the customization and gameplay outside of battle is much more like Trails. In terms of the customization, every party member has a soul device, which is essentially their weapon, that can be customized using gems called elements. These are very similar to quartz in Trails, and they also look almost identical to the ones in Cold Steel. There are also master cores that can be equipped to a soul device that are pretty much this game's version of master quartz. Outside of combat, Tokyo Xanadu, EX Plus, plays a lot like Trails, especially Trails of Cold Steel. Each chapter has a day where you can walk around after school, talk to the various NPCs, see bonding events with your party members and friends, and do a handful of side quests. You also have access to Nayar, which is a sort of social media forum type service in-universe, but functionally it is almost identical to the student notebook from Trails of Cold Steel, as it records things like character notes, battle record, recipes, and books. So from what I've just said, you can see that Tokyo Xanadu does not shy away from its shared DNA with Falcom's 2 flagship series. And that's a pretty common complaint I see that people have with this game. That being that it takes too much from Ys and Trails without forming its own identity. However, I don't fully agree with that. Sure, this game takes a lot from Trails and Ys, especially Trails of Cold Steel, There's the aforementioned similarities in gameplay, but there's also others like clear similarities in character designs, mainly in how you can see a bit of Rin and Elisa and Konosuke, how similar Morimiya Academy is set up compared to Thor's military academy in Trails of Cold Steel, and how pretty much every minigame in Tokyo Xanadu is just taken beat for beat from minigames in Cold Steel 1 and 2. The fishing arcade game is just the Cold Steel 1 and 2 fishing minigame. Magical Elisa is Mishi Panic from the School Festival in Cold Steel 1. Gates of Avalon is just Blade 2 from Cold Steel 2. And skateboarding is a vastly inferior version of the snowboarding minigame from Cold Steel 2. However, for all of these similarities, Tokyo Xanadu still feels different. In terms of combat, there is a much more intricate elemental system in place compared to Iss's 3 damage types, as there are much more elements in Tokyo Xanadu, and they interact with each other differently. Each character also later gains a sub-element to further increase your options in combat. Elements, the gems, not the damage type, are less varied than quartz, but the game makes up for that by also having upgradable skills tied to each soul device. Master cores are really the only straight up downgrade, as they're really only there to change some stats and the equipped element for said character. The damage type this time, not the gems. A lot of the out of combat gameplay is very similar to Trails, but there is a real connection to make with Morimiya that I think sets it apart from Trails, which we'll talk about later. Also, Nyar is just a cool in-universe explanation for the notebook, and it really works for me. Even the almost one-for-one minigame copies work because of the context of most of them being arcade games, so it feels more like a fun reference. Except for skateboarding, like I said. That minigame was made with pure spite and hatred for fun and whimsy. Outside of the similarities, Tokyo Xanadu, the X+, SIS, gameplay is really fun. The combat is snappy, and I do like the different characters' movesets. I initially thought that it was a bit lacking, but by the time you unlock all the different tools at your disposal, the combat really opens up. I won't lie and say it's incredibly deep, but things like the power attacks, ultimate moves, and super mode that allows your teammates to be out on the field with you all work to make for a good deal of variety in combat. My only large complaints with this aspect of the game is in the fact that the game really doesn't incentivize you to make use of all of these systems, especially for outside of boss fights. And also that the platforming is just straight booty cheeks. Overall though, I really like the combat in Tokyo Xanadu. The customization on the other hand is just alright. It's definitely not as fun or interesting as orbments in Trails, but the game doesn't really require you to play around with builds, so it's fine. The only real disappointment is Master Cores, like I mentioned earlier. I really wish they weren't just straight upgrades of each other and that they offered different effects instead. I don't need them to be Master Cores, but even something as simple as some being more range damage focused while others being more melee focused would have been preferable. Still though, it's okay. All in all, the gameplay in Tokyo Xanadu is a lot of fun. I still wouldn't put it on par with any of the Trails games or most of the East games that I've played, but it is a really solid action JRPG. Next up, we'll talk about the story and characters, and this is where the bulk of the video is going to be. These aspects were where my main complaints with the game originally sprouted from. A little bit of background is that I got this game when I was waiting for Trails of Cold Steel 3 to get an official English release date. I kind of just bought it on a whim because it was Falcom and because it kind of looked like Cold Steel. It does use the CS1 and 2 engine after all. That might have been a mistake in hindsight, as my mindset going into this game was hinged on the idea that it would be on par with Trails. I was essentially looking for Trails of Cold Steel 2.5 rather than just looking at this game for what it is. And while yeah, you could draw some lines of similarity for some of the characters, storytelling style, and general setting, just as I said in the gameplay section, I think Tokyo Xanadu does a really good job of carving out its own identity. So let's talk about the story and characters specifically. I mentioned at the start of the video that I wasn't a huge fan of these aspects of the game in my first playthrough. I wouldn't go so far as to say I disliked them, more so that they just didn't really hit for me, and I found neither aspect to be all that memorable. After this playthrough, however, my opinion has very much so changed. At the start of this replay, I still really wasn't feeling the characters or story. Both had more to them than I remembered, but nothing really stood out to me. It felt like a standard story you'd get with a solid JRPG. As the game went on, however, the story and characters quickly became much more interesting to me. I think Tokyo Xanadu is pretty subtle in its early hours. Sure, there's the whole idea of the Eclipse Gate showing up in response to heightened emotions and anxieties, but the chapters, especially early on, felt fairly disjointed. By the midpoint of the game, however, I felt like the story was tying things together in a satisfactory way. But I've been dancing around the story for a bit, so here's a bit of the basic setup of the story for context. Tokyo Xanadu, EX+, follows Ko Tokisaka, a normal high school student living in Morimiya, a city in the Tama area of Tokyo. Ko's main characteristics at the start of the game are that he seems very aloof, and that he tends to work a variety of part-time jobs after school. While coming home late from one of these jobs, he sees one of his classmates, Asuka Hiragi, get surrounded by some shady-looking dudes. When Ko goes to intervene, a mysterious gate opens up and swallows Asuka and the two guys. Ko jumps in without a second thought to rescue Asuka, only to find her fending off the monsters within with a weapon known as a soul device, and she eventually rescues everyone from the mysterious gate. After some time passes, Ko awakens to his own soul device after his childhood friend Shiori is swallowed by a different gate. Asuka then tells Ko about the Eclipse, a dangerous, monster-infested world that occasionally bleeds into their world via gates, and that only people with soul devices can defeat said monsters and close the gates. After some initial tension, Ko and Asuka eventually team up and investigate the rapid increase in Eclipse Gate incidents that have been plaguing Morimiya as of late. The premise of the story of Tokyo Xanadu is not new. You could throw a rock at a group of 12-episode anime from the 2010s and hit about 3 that have a similar setup. But this familiarity is not a bad thing. Tokyo Xanadu feels like a playable anime in many respects. Even the opening playing at the start of every chapter makes those chapters feel like episodes in a season of an anime series. But beyond that, I think the game has a lot of heart in its story and characters. Like I mentioned earlier, by the midpoint of the game, I really started to like the story and characters. There seemed to be a lot more depth than I initially thought, especially for Ko and Asuka. Asuka's journey of growth from someone who feels she cannot rely on others, not out of some sense of superiority, but rather a mixture of a need to prove herself and a fear of putting the people she cares about in danger, to someone who fully trusts her friends to the point of being willing to step back and play a more supportive role for the others, is probably my favorite character arc in the game. Also, the reveal of the reason behind Ko's aloofness and his borderline obsession with busying himself made me really like him as a protagonist. And it's not just Ko and Asuka who steal the show. Other characters like Shio and Rion really do a great job of fleshing out the cast and making them feel varied and interesting. On the plot side of things, I think the story becomes much more interesting once the game reaches the intermission. There's a more tangible goal afterwards, and each new plot reveal from that point on had me incredibly interested in the story. This is especially true for all of the stuff surrounding the final boss, and for how it displayed Ko's growth as a character. Incredible work from Falcom in this aspect. I also think I should mention the ending. Now, I'm not that tapped into the Tokyo Xanadu fanbase, so I don't know the opinions of all 10 of the fans, but from what I've seen, some people tend to prefer the normal ending over the true ending. And I have to be honest, I am the exact opposite. If the normal ending was all this game had, well, let's just say this video would not have been made. I'm a firm believer in the idea that an ending can make or break a story, so even if my opinions on the lead up to the ending of this game have improved, I think I would still feel a bit soured on this game if the normal ending was what I was left with. During this playthrough, I remember saying to myself out loud, boy, that ending was something. Good thing I still have the true ending. The true ending was much more my kind of thing. I can't get into why I felt this way without entering into spoiler territory, but it really boils down to the normal ending feeling very unsatisfying to me, and the true ending making me go, this game was great, what was I on in 2018? I'm not trying to shame people who feel otherwise about the endings, I'm just trying to say that the true ending was much more my speed. I also really liked the after story. It felt like a great send-off to the game and tied up some loose ends that I didn't realize were there at first. I do also want to touch on one of my previous criticisms mentioned near the start of the video, that being that I felt like the game was a bit too long, which mainly sprouted from me thinking the game had too many endings. The latter aspect of that criticism is ironic coming from me, as I love both Return of the King and Trails of Cold Steel 2, two stories that are often criticized for having too many endings. But those two are peak, so it's different. In all seriousness though, I don't know what I was talking about with that criticism. The game definitely did not feel like it had too many endings on a second playthrough. Like I said, the normal ending was unsatisfying for me and felt incomplete in a way. The true ending felt like the answer to that, at least to me. And the after story just felt like a victory lap for the game in a way, which fits because it wasn't in the original game and was an EX Plus edition if I remember correctly. I do think the game drags in places though. Part of the penultimate chapter felt that way to me, but I think that's just partially due to the new side stories added into the EX Plus version of the game. I didn't mind them as they were great for some small character moments, but having one after every chapter except Chapter 7, the prologue, and the finale was a bit much. One aspect of the story that I think this game absolutely excels in from beginning to end is the setting. Morimiya is one of the best cities in gaming. There's a real personality to every location, from the bustling city center of Station Square, to the rustic feel of the shopping street, to the beautiful aesthetic of Brick Alley, to the seedy back alleys of Horacho. Every part of the city feels alive, and it's made even more personal through the NPCs. Much like in Trails, every NPC in Tokyo Xanadu has their own lives that you can see progress throughout the story. It feels incredibly rewarding to talk with the NPCs and learn about small connections between them, or to see them grow as their own characters. And the fact that you are only really ever in Morimiya makes that connection to the people and the city itself feel much stronger. In a way, it feels similar to something like Crossbell City or Edith, but I honestly think Morimiya is most similar to Inaba from Persona 4, just more urban. Falcom managed to combine part of that Inaba feel with Trails NPCs, so of course it's one of the best in the genre. Finally, on the story section of this video, I briefly want to talk about the script of the game. Like I said at the start of the video, I played the PS4 version of this game, which used the original localized script. Straight off the cuff, I want to say that the script itself is not bad. Despite some gripes that I have with it, it works perfectly well for the game and conveys the most important aspects of the story and characters. And I don't want to knock on it too much, as I'd rather have the game localized in this state than not at all. That point is moot though, as there is a much better updated script in most of the other ports of this game. With all of that said though, there were a lot of weird things that I noticed about the script. There were quite a few grammatical errors, but nothing to the level that I couldn't understand what the text was trying to convey. Honestly, the only parts that bothered me were some weird localization things. The first that comes to mind are the presence of some sayings that just felt really Western for Japanese high school students to be using as idioms. Roaming like Cain is the one that I remember off the top of my head. Maybe they were saying a similar Japanese idiom that was just hard to translate, but it stood out to me. The other is the overuse of kinda sorta. Whenever a character in the script says kinda, you bet your JRPG loving behind there's gonna be a sorta following it. What bothered me about it was that, at least from my neck of the woods, the words together as kinda sorta convey a different tone than either kinda or sorta individually. It's typically used to express an extra level of uncertainty and might be followed by an I guess for extra flair. The characters in this script use it the same as either kinda or sorta, rather than something like kinda, sorta, which is what I'm used to. But hey, this might just be a regional thing. The one thing about this script that annoyed me the most, though, is that everyone in this game can't stop chortling. You can't go 5 minutes without someone chortling. I've never heard so many people chortle in my life. It's a dang pandemic in Morimiya. Forget the eclipse, how about we investigate the supernatural entity that's been making people chortle all the goddamn time? Tokyo Xanadu? More like all I'm Tokyo Xanaduing is chortling. In all seriousness though, it did get a bit annoying to see chortle used so often, especially when there are other words that could have been used like chuckle or even giggle in some cases. Again, not game ruining, but I did find it funny enough to mention. All in all, just play this game with the updated script if you can. This version of the script is perfectly fine though, and I don't think it'll ruin your experience if you only have access to it. So you do you. Lastly, before we wrap up, I want to mention the soundtrack for this game. Tokyo Xanadu released towards the end of the era of peak Falcom soundtracks, but it was for sure still a part of it. That era from Sky the Third to East 8 was a generational run by Sound Team JDK, and Tokyo Xanadu fits right in. It has a mix of tracks that sound like they were taken right out of the Cold Steel 1 and 2 soundtracks, and others that really give this game a unique vibe. Tracks like Hazy Moon, Bustle, X.R.C, Survey Legwork, Horrifying Disaster, Investigation, Possibility Flaps, Master's Recommendation, That Day 10 years ago, and Revolt Against Doom all act to give this game a sound of its own. Even some tracks from the EX Plus version, which definitely sound different from the base game and have a different vibe, are still bangers. Seething Ardor, Vesper Umbra, and With an Important Person come to mind for me. The last of which gets bonus points for having a section of notes that sounds like To a Glimmering Tomorrow to me, and you already know how much I love that song. So yeah, Tokyo Xanadu's soundtrack slaps. If you were to tell me that it was your favorite Falcom soundtrack, I would not argue with you. It's just incredible. So with all of that said, what's the verdict on Tokyo Xanadu? Well, let's look at those 3 complaints from my first playthrough that I mentioned at the start of the video. First was that the characters felt bland and tropey. Well, I already mentioned that I have turned around on this opinion. I think some of the characters can feel a bit uninteresting at first, mainly just Ko and Sora, but by the end of the game I grew to really love them. In terms of being tropey, I don't know what I was on for that. Sure, this game does wear its anime influences on its sleeve, but it's not any more tropey than really any Trails game, or at least by a significant degree. The only thing that I remember thinking was really tropey on my first playthrough was White Shroud, but again, he's not that much more tropey than other Falcom properties, including both Ys and Trails, so I was just hating for no reason, I guess. The second complaint was feeling that the combat was just meh. This is another one that I have turned around on. I won't lie and say that Tokyo Xanadu has my favorite action RPG combat, but it's perfectly fine for what it is. The game prioritizes quick battles, and it still offers enough variety in systems and customization to keep the gameplay interesting. The only real complaint that I have is that I wish the game incentivized use of those systems and customization a bit more. That and the platforming being straight cheeks. I do not have a defense for that one. But all in all, the gameplay is still a lot of fun. Lastly was my complaint about the game feeling like it dragged, which I have already went over. I think the game did not have too many endings or that it overstayed its welcome, but I did feel it dragging in a few places. Still though, nothing significant enough to negatively alter my opinion. So my final verdict on Tokyo Xanadu after 8 years is that, yeah, I loved it, and I was wrong about my initial opinions on the game. Do I think this game is as good as Trails or my top Ys games? Not really. But that's like arguing a giant mountain being taller than a slightly smaller mountain. They're both big. I'd probably place Tokyo Xanadu at around Ys 10 level for me, as I find the gameplay of Ys 10 to be much better than that of Tokyo Xanadu, but the story and characters of this game knock those of Ys 10 out of the water, pun fully intended. So yeah, I guess this makes me the 11th Tokyo Xanadu fan. This game is great, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a good, fun JRPG with a lot of heart to play. Falcom really doesn't miss. Thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. It was a lot of fun making a video about Tokyo Xanadu, and this makes me want to try revisiting some other older games that I had more negative opinions on and seeing if my thoughts will have changed now that I'm older. Maybe I'll make it into a series, who knows. Anyway, thank you once again for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all of that. And please let me know your thoughts on Tokyo Xanadu in the comments down below. I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you have a wonderful week.